This is the Education Exchange with Paul Peterson. I am the director of the program on education policy and governance at Harvard University. Thank you for joining us. Virtual education had its earliest successes at Florida Virtual School, a statewide public school in Florida, founded in the late 1990s. In the beginning, it had only a few hundred students. But over the years, virtual learning has spread across the United States so that by 2023, nearly 700,000 students were enrolled in virtual schools. Yet, in the wake of the COVID pandemic, virtual schooling came under a lot of criticism. Uh, Researchers thought it wasn't working, parents and students didn't like it, and the quality of education declined. We have a lot of test score data that show that a lot of learning loss occurred during that period, and there was a lot of social isolation and emotional distress. Yet, Julie Young, the founder of the Florida Virtual School, the first statewide public virtual school, says in her new book that the COVID experience is fundamentally misleading. The book is entitled Yes, How Virtual Became Reality. The book is partly a memoir, partly a statement about leadership, and partly about how virtual learning holds great promise. So I'm pleased to have Julie Young with me on the Education Exchange today. Julie, thank you for joining me on the Education Exchange.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate you having me.
In your book, you say that school closures during the COVID pandemic, well, that experience tells us how not to do virtual learning. What did educators do wrong during the pandemic?
Well, what fundamentally changed when COVID hit was that virtual education lost the very thing that has always protected its quality, and that's choice. When families choose virtual school, when they chose virtual school before the pandemic, they opted in. They opted in with intention. So students were motivated, parents were engaged, and teachers who signed on actually wanted to be there. The entire model was built on that voluntary commitment. So when the pandemic forced everyone online overnight, all of that just disappeared. So you had teachers who never wanted to teach online, students who never wanted to learn that way, overwhelmed parents who were trying to figure out how to work from home, all trying to replicate a physical classroom through a Zoom box. And that's not virtual education. So we call that emergency remote instruction, and we need to stop letting people confuse the two. Um, Really, the schools have invested years in thoughtful online design. There's clear learning objectives and meaningful teacher-student relationships, and that went out the window with COVID. So I also think that states had a lot of things that they could have done to support virtual learning through this crisis that did not activate. So, for example, one of the things I share frequently is the fact that every state, or almost every state, had a successful virtual school of some kind at the time COVID hit. It may not have been a state virtual school like Florida Virtual School, but it might have been a strong virtual school that serves the state like ASU Prep Digital. And each one of those leaders at that state level could have called upon those experienced operators and said, let's come together, let's get together, and let's figure out how you can support our state so that every one of our students in our state can have a quality education through this crisis. And that simply did not happen.
Fascinating, fascinating. It seems to me that that choice point that you made is so critical. You got to be able to buy in or not buy in, depending on your situation. But what do you see as the three most important keys to making virtual education work? I mean, stepping aside from that experience, looking forward, what are the three things that you really have to attend to make virtual education work? I suppose choice is one of them, but in addition to that, what else?
Yeah, I just shared this earlier today on a podcast, but it's a great question and cannot be emphasized too much. First and foremost, leadership. Leadership has to believe, and as I say, not just tolerate or put up with it. It needs to be embraced by leadership, and then that needs to flow down through the entire organization so that your teachers, your staff, your students, your families feel the commitment to this type of education. I think the other thing that was very lost in COVID is training. We trained the dickens out of people at Florida Virtual School, and still today at ASU Prep Digital, there's just an immense amount of training available for teachers. People kind of think you can walk out of a classroom and walk into a virtual classroom and pick up where you left off. And that is simply not the case. It's an entirely different way of teaching and of learning. And teachers have to learn to teach in that environment, and students have to learn to learn in that environment. And so training teachers, training students, training staff, training parents is all super important, I think, for a successful virtual
Let
experience.
me let me prod you a little bit on that because you say training, but exactly what is it that you need to learn that you didn't already know as a good teacher in the classroom? What's how does your interaction with the student change?
So I used to tell new teachers back before we had video, which you and I remember that. Not many people do, but we do, that your students and your parents need to feel your smile through the phone. How you relate to other human beings, i.e., children and parents, when you are not physically present, sitting in the same room with them, is a different skill set. And so teachers had to come up with all kinds of crazy, fun types of engaging activities to, number one, get kids to show up, but then number two, get kids to actually attend to the learning, which is different, obviously, when you don't have a teacher circulating through the room, poking you on the shoulder if you're not paying attention. I think the other thing, too, when we talk about training parents, parents don't always understand what plagiarism is and what cheating is, even though we think they should and we think they do. So we spend a lot of time actually teaching parents how to help their students and how not to help their students, i.e., their children, and make sure that they understand exactly what those expectations are. So,
Yeah, no, that is bringing up a new topic, and I guess we can come back to another key in a minute. But once you bring up this topic, now it's artificial intelligence, and this is just bedeviling me in the classroom. How can I create a work environment where students are not sort of I don't mind if they use artificial intelligence, but what I do mind is the substitution of artificial intelligence for their intelligence. Now,
mhm.
how can you manage that in an online environment?
Well, I think with any new technology, as I like to say, there's fears and cheers. We are excited about it and all of its possibilities, and at the same time, we are fearful of all of the nuances it could introduce that are scary or dangerous. I would be a millionaire, billionaire, zillionaire if I could answer your question directly. I think we're all trying to figure that out. We were at an education conference last week and it was such a hot topic. And I think there are these extremes that we're experiencing right now where we have educators that absolutely want to just keep it completely out of the education experience, keep it out of the classroom completely. And then I think we have the realist who recognize, wow, I'm wrestling with this because I need to teach students how to use this properly, and not all students are using it properly. But for goodness sakes, if I don't teach kids how to use artificial intelligence, they are not going to be marketable when they graduate from high school. And we've all seen the data and the statistics, and we've all heard the adage of AI is not going to eliminate jobs, but it's, or replace people in those jobs, but it's going to replace people who don't know how to use artificial intelligence. So I think by bringing it into the classroom and actually showing students of all ages the proper way to use it, the advantages and the disadvantages. And I think also to your point about, I love how you said that about artificial intelligence not replacing their intelligence. I think you have to talk about that. And I think that they have to understand that they could be compromising themselves in the same way we had conversations with students about cheating, which was you're compromising your integrity, you're compromising your learning that you're going to need later, and try to help them understand. I think shutting it out is probably the worst thing that we could do. Um, so I think we're grappling with it, but I think again, at all ages, we're having to show kids how to use it. I will tell you a story. I was in a school in Dubai with the GEMS education group, and we walked into a classroom randomly, and the students were in groups. This was probably fifth or sixth grade students, and they were in groups, and they were having conversations in their groups with Christopher Columbus. And they had been given a set of questions to ask by their teacher. And then they were also able to make up some of their own questions. And so when I walked in the room, they were going around to the different groups and they were sharing what they had learned from Christopher Columbus. And then as they talked about it, the teacher said, okay, well, let's look at the similarities and then let's look at the differences. And then they had a whole talk about, okay, so what do you think is accurate and what do you think is made up by the chat bot? And it was fascinating. But again, what it was teaching the students is, yes, we can learn from this and it can be helpful, but we also need to trust, trust but verify. And that artificial intelligence is not perfect. And they talked about a chatbot trying to please and so forth. So it was a great example and exercise for kids to actually learn the value of the tool as well as the disadvantage.
Well, that's a great story. I just love that story. So I'm going to keep that in mind. Maybe it won't be Christopher Columbus, but that's a clever idea.
Yeah.
So let me just ask you, let's go back. This is a memoir that you've written in part. And so tell me about what it was like to open up Florida Virtual School back in the 90s when you began this undertaking. Um, First of all, when did you realize that this was something that the country needed, that Florida needed?
Well, I don't know that I can't take initial credit for that. But let's go back to those years. It was 1996, and a teacher in Orange County had written a two-page concept paper. She was a computer science teacher. She's no longer with us, but she was an AP teacher. And Orange County at the time was the schools were very overcrowded, and there, were very few computer science teachers in the district, probably in the state. And so she went to the leadership and said, "Hey, if I could teach kids over this thing called the internet, I could teach kids in other schools." And the leadership loved the idea, and that two-page concept paper became the grant proposal for what became Florida Virtual School. My involvement was so random and so serendipitous in that I was new to the district, but I had had a great deal of experience previously in Lee County working with IBM with my elementary schools, both San Carlos Park Elementary and um, Pine Woods Elementary, working with IBM, utilizing their software, their computers, their pedagogy, and doing their training. And so when I came to Orange County, I had this very rich resume of those three little letters, IBM, and all this ed tech experience. And when I actually think about Bob Williams and the interview, Bob Williams was the associate or assistant superintendent, I believe, at the time. And I kind of figured out I was in an interview. And I said, hey, I'm an elementary person. I have never done high school. The only thing I remember is what I remember from my own experience. And he said, well, that is one of the reasons why we would like for you to consider being the principal of this school. We want someone to come at the student experience with a completely different lens. And he used the best phrase, which was, we want somebody who can engage the students who aren't interested in the pep rallies. So those disenfranchised students. And so honestly, Paul, it was totally making it up as we went along, being given permission by the commissioner at the time, Frank Brogan, where he just said, go make it up and come back and tell us how to do it. No one knows how to do this. Use your best judgment, and you don't have to follow any of the rules. So we walked away, or I walked away with a challenge to literally kind of reinvent education as we knew it in this new model and start from scratch.
Well, you have to have some political support at the state level to open this up as a state school. I realize you had that support in those counties, but how did you manage to make this a statewide school? And where did you get your political backing?
Well, the political backing came from both Orange County and Alachua County, the two counties that had received the grant. And so initially we were a two-county school, and we weren't a school, we were a program at the time. And, we started piecing together pretty quickly that there wasn't any reason why this program had to be geographically bound to those two counties. And so it was within probably the second year that we started to have conversations about expanding out into the rest of the state. So in Orange County, Dan Webster, who is now Congressman Dan Webster for the United States Congress, um, he was the Speaker of the House, and he was the Orange County representative. And he was a big believer. I think it was his daughter homeschooled her children. And the Homeschool Foundation, as you may recall, was keenly involved in the effort in Alachua County. And so when we were going at this from these two different districts, it was unbeknownst to each other. And so Alachua County had their set of issues that they were trying to solve for, which were really about the fact that they were such a rural district and they did not have the AP courses to offer to kids in an equitable manner. And Orange County had the overcrowding issue and wanted to look at the students who were obviously disenfranchised. And so that was really critical that Dan had buy-in to homeschooling and the fact that public education should serve all kids, regardless of whether they were public, private, or homeschooled students. So he went to bat for us and got us our first line item chunk of money after the grant ran out, and it was identified in legislation as Project Orange. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess that's not a good label to wear for very long. So
Yeah, yeah,
we
yeah.
moved on from that. So now let me tell you, Florida Virtual became so successful that many school districts in Florida set up their own virtual programs, more or less in competition with Florida Virtual. And I remember that created sort of a crisis within your organization. Looking back on that, how has that all worked out? How is Florida Virtual doing today?
I think Florida Virtual School is alive and healthy and doing very well today, serving, millions of students. And I know that they are serving students still in all 50 states and more than 68 countries. And so, very strong, continue to be very strong. You're referring to the Florida Virtual School franchise program, which was really kind of over coffee, sitting down with the person who was the director of distance education for Broward County at the time. It was back in the early 2000s. And what happened was, again, we were a program, we weren't a school. We were really designed to fill gaps for other districts in hard to fill courses and circumstances. And Broward, Marianne Butler Pearson was her name. She's a great lady. And she really loved the idea and caught on quickly. And so she was like, I want this in our district. And so we went in to serve them for a world history course. Started out, we were in one school and one classroom for a world history course and worked with them beautifully. And she was like, well, how about you do the entire world history for this particular school? So the next thing we knew, we were actually teaching five different classes for them in that school. And toward the end of the semester, the second semester, I said, Marianne, I said, this is a little uncomfortable in that we're not really filling a gap or serving a need. We're saving you money because we are serving all your students for world history, but this really isn't our mission. And so she said, well, how about you teach us how to do what you do? And we set up our own little Florida virtual school. So we sat down and brainstormed what this would look like and came to the idea that we would create a franchise program and talked about the fact, that the hamburger had to taste the same. We talked about that a lot. If we went to this idea, and you're spot on. We were what I called a co-opetition model for our districts. We were huge supports of our districts and really existed to serve them and to serve any student needs that they had. And at the same time, we also had to take care of our organization and make sure that we survived in the process. And so it was a constant balance of how much to give and how much to maintain in what we would call the mothership. So Florida Virtual School franchise is actually in legislation. When we first started, one of the things I was trying to do was hire a teacher in every district. And those teachers came to us first on loan because we were a risky thing. And we figured this would be a way that teachers would try teaching for us without risking losing their position in their district. So we had several districts that were interested, and those ended up becoming our first pilot franchises. And the idea was that they would mirror our pedagogy, our instructional model, our accountability model, and our feedback loops, et cetera, with parents. And we were very strict on that. There was an agreement that just outlined everything we would do, everything they would do. And that was revisited on an annual basis based on our observation of their performance and, of course, their satisfaction with our service. And so, anyway, it just grew from there.
Yes. So listen, let me ask you, Julie, what's the evidence? Florida Virtual has been around for a long time now, and are the students finishing high school? Are they going on to college? Are they finishing college? What kind of evidence do we have that actually this alternative model works?
Yeah, what was really interesting when Florida started to do end of course exams, which was, in the mid those 2008 time period, I think, when they started doing the end of course exams, and our full-time students and our part-time students were actually taking those end of course exams if they had taken that particular course with us. And so we were able to see that data. And the first year that the end of course exams actually were implemented, Florida Virtual School students were 10th in the state out of 67 districts. So that was early accountability data that we had, and that has maintained. Last year, I believe Florida Virtual School had the highest graduation rate in the state. Um, The data is strong in terms of completion and in terms of graduation and in terms of college going. That's not the case with all virtual schools. You can't paint a broad brush, and it certainly depends on the design of the school as well as the design of the student body and who they are actually serving and attracting. I think what's really awesome about not only Florida Virtual School, but ASU Prep Digital, which I feel so strongly about getting to kind of start over again with all that we had learned and implement again, is that there's such a variety of students. There's not a particular audience that is being sought or being marketed to. It really is about serving all students that might have a unique need or a unique circumstance where virtual learning will work well for them and for their family.
So now you went to Arizona and Arizona Prep at ASU, Arizona State University. And uh, how is it different from Florida? Is it the same? Is it a replication, or I think you said you started over again, but it's so I'm wondering how does it differ, or is it exactly the same? How would you compare the two?
If you were to put them side by side without a microscope, you would say they're very similar, and they are. The differences came about from being able to say, what did we learn and what would we have done? What would we do differently now that we have the opportunity to quote unquote do it again, start over? The biggest thing that we wanted to solve for was the teacher having all the burden and all the responsibility for the whole child and recognizing the fact that that is just an absolutely huge monumental job. In those early days, our teachers were so dedicated, so excited, so bought in to what we were doing and to, the survival of the school and the excellence of the school, that the amount of work that went into the jobs that they were doing was just incredible. So as a single teacher, I don't mean single as in single, as an individual teacher, and you're responsible for all the teaching, all the learning, all the social emotional needs that students may have. Um, what we would call chasing when students would get off pace or disappear for a little while they were distracted with their other responsibilities. All of that came down to a single teacher having to perform all those functions. So the first thing that we did was we created what is called a learning success coach at ASU Prep Digital. And that learning success coach does exactly what the title indicates. They are dedicated and responsible to working with that student and with that family to enable that student to be successful in their course. The teacher is zeroed in on teaching and learning, and that learning success coach becomes their partner. We attempt to keep that learning success coach with a student the entire time they are with us, year after year. And they get to know the families and they become part of the families, frankly. And so they are their college going counselor. They are their ear when things aren't going well. They are their go-to if they're struggling with a teacher. The learning success coach is the one that reaches out if a student falls off pace. And so that was a huge value add that we oftentimes would call our silver bullet in this new model. I think the other thing that is different about ASU Prep Digital is that it was very much designed to create new models for education success, test those models, and then scale those models. That's part of who we are and the DNA of ASU Prep Digital. And so we have many different models. We have probably, I'm saying we, I'm still on their board, but I haven't been CEO for about a year and a half now. And there are 7 or 8 different models that have been implemented across the United States and within the campus of ASU So we are giving our students all kinds of different ways of which to engage in learning.
So let me ask you whether or not this is the solution to the high school problem. I sort of feel like the high school is a broken institution as it operates in many school districts across the country. I know there are successful, I know there are great high schools, but I feel like there's just a lot of high school students who have disengaged completely from that experience.
Mhm.
Do you think that online learning is a solution or partial solution, or how do you think it can address the biggest problem in our educational system, at least from my point of view?
So it's a great question, Paul. When COVID hit, and I'm sure other schools and school districts experience the same thing. We had a bit of a revolving door with our brick and mortar schools. Kids would leave, they would come back. They would leave, they would come back. And a lot of that was around the whole mask issue. Are we wearing masks? Are we not wearing masks? And where do I want to be at the moment? But we were very diligent about doing exit interviews with our students, but also with the parents of those students to find out exactly why they were leaving and exactly why they were enrolling. And we looked at each other one day, and I said to the team, I said, why are we not creating the models, the different models we do not have that students and parents say they're leaving for? If we as a charter network want to create opportunities for students regardless of their circumstances where they don't want to leave us. And so that's when we experimented with the first hybrid classroom where students came to school 2 days a week and were home 3 days a week. And that's where we also looked at what would it take for us to set up micro schools within our ASU campuses. And our first micro school was on our West campus at ASU. And so right there, we had two new models that we had to offer to our families. The micro school model has expanded, and we have a micro school. There's a different name for it now, but it's basically a micro school. I think it's called Digital Plus, if I'm not mistaken. And on all four of our campuses, and each of those micro schools or Digital Plus schools have a different curriculum offering based on what that campus offers. So, for example, if you go to the West Campus, kids were doing criminal justice, they were doing engineering. If they went to the Mix campus, which is the Cindy Poitier School of Music and Media, all of it was about music and media. They were creating art. If they went to a different campus, it was a different curriculum. And so kids would sign up to be digital students. So they were part of ASU Prep Digital, or they are part of ASU Prep Digital. But then they could select which of those campuses that they wanted to have an on-campus experience. And it's been such a beautiful success. And it gives those kids the best of the best of both worlds. And then within the school campuses, the ASU Prep campuses, we also have hybrid opportunities where students can engage on a limited or more regular basis. And then from there, our Con World School was developed, which is for the highly gifted students. It's all online, but kids have to qualify to get into that school. And then we have a new program that is coming soon in Massachusetts, which is called Felix, which is modeled after our Levitt Lab, which is a Socratic methodology in-person school that is on also an ASU campus. So all these different ways that students can learn, and that again is the DNA of ASU Prep Digital that makes it different.
So, this is, I think, Julie, what is so remarkable about you as an educator is how broad-minded you are, how you don't settle in on this is the right way to do it, and this has to be the right way. You just keep thinking about, okay, every child is different and every child can learn in its own way, and that is we need to create an educational system that's responsive to that reality. Is that the secret to your success?
I think that is definitely one of the secrets to my success. I think the biggest secret to my success is I have a knack for hiring great people. When I think about the people that are still at FLVS and certainly at ASU Prep in leadership, and the fact that I had the privilege to work with them and they have been able to not only carry the torch, but the torch is now burning brighter. Nothing could make me more proud. I think that, if you can find a group of people that are willing and able to try again, try another way, then you have the secret sauce to innovation.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you see this is a book that you've written about leadership. And I have to confess to you that I tend to sort of think that leadership is so elusive, it's very hard to put down in words on a piece of paper. This is what leadership is.
Mhm.
So, what do you want to say about leadership in the broadest sense of the concept?
Well, the title of the book says a lot. The title of the book is Say Yes, Say Yes, How Virtual Became Reality. The say yes part really is about the fact that I didn't have a plan. I did not have a map. I did not have career goals. I had an open mind to saying yes when opportunity came along with an understanding that I could try something, and if it didn't work out, it wouldn't be the end of the world. And by saying yes when opportunity did come along, I think it gave me the opportunity to have the freedom and flexibility to innovate and experiment in educational models. It is hard to put a definition around leadership, and everyone has one. I talk about leadership through stories in the book and examples of, how we did certain things or how I thought about certain circumstances and how they played out and whether or not they were successful or not. Talk a lot about giving people the opportunity to fail, but fail fast. Make mistakes, but try not to make the same one twice. You don't learn if you don't make mistakes, because obviously, if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying hard enough. And the fact that, to me, leadership has nothing to do with the title and it has everything to do with who follows and how they follow, which then relates to how incredibly important the culture of an organization is to the success of an organization. And my belief about culture, when I had the privilege of starting Florida Virtual School, I remember saying to my husband, um, after he said, "Are you crazy? Are you really thinking you're going to develop software?" And I said, I don't know. I'm going to call my friends at IBM and get in a room with them and see if we can figure it out. But I did say to him, I said, I want to build a school where I want to work. I love my job. I love my work. And a huge part of that was the people that I worked with. And I would get up in the morning and I would be excited about going to work. I would, forget about what time it was and forget to pick up my paychecks. I just loved the work. And so, I think about that all the time. The word job has a negative connotation. And I believe that we have an opportunity to, as leaders, to build organizations where people can be fed. And if they are fed, then they are, you know, likely to feed others.
So I think this is so insightful of you that you've got to learn how to say yes. You can't just always say no. So many people want to say no to something different. It means, reorganizing your life. It means doing something different. It means, forcing yourself to actually learn something. And so if you have this mentality, say yes. Well, why not?
Yeah.
So Congratulations, Julie, on your new book and on your great career. So, thank you for joining me on the Education Exchange.
Paul, thank you for having me. You've always been such a huge supporter of educators and of me personally, and I appreciate you greatly. Thank
I've
you.
been speaking with Julie Young. She's the founding CEO of Florida Virtual School. She's the former director of Arizona Prep School, and she's now the author of a new forthcoming book entitled Say Yes, How Virtual Became Reality. I am Paul Peterson. This is the Education Exchange. Please join me for a new Education Exchange podcast released on the Education Next website every Monday at noon Eastern Time.